But what you can expect, I think, most likely when it comes to foreign policy, is that this administration is plans now to confront the rise of its near-peer competitors, challenging near-peer competitors, China and Russia in particular, and the constellation of rogue states and terrorist groups in orbit around those two peers, by increasing defense spending and lobbying for an increase in defense spending among our frontline allies and partners. And we've seen some conflict in that with the MAGA right as well, that is much more inclined towards retrenchment, quasi-isolationist view, although I'm hesitant to use that term. But we've seen signals now from the incoming administration that they're getting a little more realistic, in particular with regards to Ukraine, where the administration is telling allies, according to the Financial Times, that they will continue to provide lethal aid and support for Ukraine indefinitely, and it's unconditional. However, they do expect to lobby Western partners to increase their percent of GDP relative to defense spending as the commitment to be a NATO member to 5%. That's way above what we spend in the United States, and many other, perhaps Poland, maybe many other states don't reach that. But they've also heard that the Trump administration is saying we'll settle for 3.5, which is realistic and which is actually a consonant strategy. If you're saying that the world is getting more dangerous, you cannot also say, well, you're on your own with this conflict.
All right.
It's becoming to look more like a coherent Republican foreign policy. There'll be excesses. There will be Trumpian excesses. We
Yep.
can expect him to try new and different things in new and different ways and probably encounter failures along the way. But we are beginning to see signals of a much more conventional administration. There are obviously factions within the country, some of whom are more hostile to immigration, skilled or unskilled immigration, writ large, and also illegal immigration, which is broadly across the spectrum of Republican politics disliked. And the efforts to crack down on the semblance of whatever remains of Joe Biden's pretty lax border policies will be taken care of by executive order on day one. The controversial stuff is, as the previous guest was saying, whether or not the president is enticed by those in his base who are the loudest. And I don't think they're reflective of the majority view, because Republicans, if you look at the polling, while they self-identify as MAGA, don't necessarily identify as hostile to immigration, particularly skilled immigration. But there are a loud element on the right that want to see the president revoke certain statuses, protected statuses for people who are in the country illegally but are nevertheless not subject to deportation. Those are going to be the sticking points. But Donald Trump has a mandate to pursue a pretty broad deportation policy, and I think he's going to try to do something more dramatic than what Tom Homan has laid out, which is deporting people who have already been through the process, previous deportees, and individuals who are in the court system. That's the low-hanging fruit. The tough stuff is going to come a little bit later, probably within the first 100 days, but at the end of it.
Oh, okay. We've talked about migration, as we always do when we discuss Donald Trump and his policies. But what about some of the other things the MAGA devotees expect? What else do you think we should expect to see during the first 100 days that he might be fine-tuning between now and Inauguration Day?
Oh, we're fine-tuning on the fly. If you listen to the president's interviews, he strikes dramatic tones, often in contrast with his appointees or nominees designate. He will say maximalist, and this is his tendency. He says maximalist goals and maximalist deliverables. And his appointees are a little bit more tailored and narrow and focused in what they want to achieve and how they want to achieve it. What I expect we'll see is a flurry of executive orders. Some of them will be pretty banal, like restoring a Mexico City policy or staffing, like replacing U.S. attorneys. That happens whenever there's a change of power in the administration. We might see something more controversial, like Schedule F executive orders. The Schedule F allows the president to reclassify federal service members, civil service employees, as at-will employees, which allows them to be fired and replaced with other individuals. And now the opposition to that is probably going to be, well, he's staffing his administration with loyalists. And that is the president's prerogative. The executive power emanates from the president. He can do that if he wants to. And we should probably evaluate them on these candidates on their merits. But that is one place where I think we could see some real controversy. Also, tariffs. The president loves tariffs, and he may very well try to test Congress and the court's willingness to absorb presidential authority on that, which is somewhat untested. The president has broad powers to impose certain tariffs on a national security basis, but not on a commercial basis. And if he can't prove that to a court's satisfaction, or Congress's for that matter, we may see some conflict. A lot of this is in Congress's court, whether they approve of a lot of his controversial nominees and whether they can manage two reconciliation packages or one reconciliation package to extend the tax code, and then do all the other stuff that Republicans in Congress want to do. Congress will really set the agenda in the first couple of weeks of this administration.
Well, yes, because I mean, they showed recently, well, 38 Republicans, they were prepared to defy Trump's edicts, or essentially throwing out a revised bill because they thought it was going to abandon any attempt to control spiraling American debt. Trump may have a bit enough more than he can chew if he thinks he can just roll over these Republicans.
Well, perhaps that was an interesting development because the assumption is that Republicans in Congress, especially this particular faction of Republicans in Congress, and many of whom are the most activists on the right, are very loyal to Donald Trump. But they bucked him in this particular because I think we're confusing some of the terms here when it comes to Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy and the Doge committee that you talked about previously. Yeah. Their objective is to limit spending, to make government more efficient, to cut waste where they can find it, and eventually get around to the big drivers of the debt, which are America's popular domestic spending and programs like Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. Now, Donald Trump he was on board with that package, according to all the reporting. He was read into the process by the Speaker's office, and he was okay with it until Elon Musk tanked it on the grounds that it was too profligate. But what Donald Trump came back with was a request to lift the debt ceiling, which is a fail-safe against excess federal spending. If you hit that debt ceiling and you keep spending, but you talk about how you keep spending, it is a mechanism to arrest runaway federal debt. And Donald Trump wants to do away with it. So we're talking past each other here. His allies on the one hand are saying cut spending, and he on the other hand is saying get rid of all the mechanisms that stop me from spending.
Yeah, because remember, we know that he, as well as loving tariffs, Noah, he loves debt. He adores debt. Remember that?
As a financial mechanism, yeah, I think he understands debt more in terms of a property owner's understanding of debt and how it's beneficial for tax purposes and what have you, and for credit purposes. But yes, his understanding of the federal debt is not a traditional green eyeshade conservative's understanding of the federal debt. And there's always been that conflict within the Republican Party since Donald Trump rose. Is this going to be a very populist party that promises maximalist objectives for people, or maximalist goals, the number of services that you can access with the lowest possible tax burden associated with them? Or is it going to be a fiscally prudent party that recognizes that growth in the economy writ large and everybody else doing better as a result is a function of managing America's sovereign debt obligations? Yeah. These two things are in conflict.
Noah, I mean, we've talked already about the fault lines on migration. What about some of the other fault lines you foresee? Because people expect that under Trump, America will be back, as they see it, as a big force in the world, telling China where to go, sorting out the problems between Russia and Ukraine, annexing the Panama Canal, making Canada and yet another state of the USA. He's marching people up to the top of the hill. He's not really managing expectations very well, is he, Trump?
You forgot the purchase of Greenland.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I forgot that as well. Yes,
a very serious priority of this administration,
yes.
And not a crazy idea, frankly, for in ways that it's talked about in public. But nevertheless, yes, broadly, set expectations. A lot of them will not be reached. I think the American people, having lived through 4 years of something very similar, have come to expect that the president says a lot of highfalutin things and rarely achieves those objectives, and doesn't do much to manage expectations either. That's sort of part of his personality.